Coming up, another episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas. A podcast produced by Bob Rash.
That delivers a logical analysis of objective reality, grounded in rational principles. We will explore relevant facts and radical ideas based on the axiomatic principles of identity, causality, and consciousness, on reason as an absolute, on rational self-interest as a moral guide, and on the ideals of privacy, freedom, and justice.
Welcome to The Deep Dive. You know, we're swimming in information these days, right? Headlines, posts, narratives everywhere. And it makes you wonder, what's actually true? And maybe even more important, who do you trust to tell you? Today, we're diving deep into a really challenging look at an institution most of us know well, the New York Times. How it's seen by, well, at least one observer as maybe straying from its path, its mission of journalistic excellence. Okay, let's unpack this. We're focusing on a Substack piece by Roberto Ruchelski. It's called Truth is the Enemy, published July 31, 2025. And that title alone tells you something, but the subtitle hits even harder, from the Holodomor to Gaza and the internal collapse of the New York Times. So our mission here for you is to really pull out the key takeaways from this critique, give you a shortcut to understanding Ruchelski's arguments about journalistic integrity, or how he sees it declining in some specific cases. We're going to walk through the examples he uses, these specific moments he highlights, to back up his big claim.
Which is basically that when a free press, which should be all about truth, starts aligning with certain agendas, well, it can actually become truth's enemy.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating here and kind of crucial to get up front is Ruchelski's starting point. He really emphasizes how vital a free press is, you know. In a democracy, it's supposed to be the bedrock, the defender of facts, a check on power. But his core argument, the main thrust of the article, is that this role gets seriously compromised. Dangerously so, he thinks, when that press lines up with ideological goals, takes sides. He argues it flips the script. Instead of seeking truth, it becomes its opponent. And he points the finger directly at the New York Times, saying it now systematically fails in its mission. Why? Because of what he calls prejudiced reporting and the silencing of intellectual diversity. I mean, these are heavy charges. And to back this up, he doesn't just make general claims. He lays out 3 specific episodes spanning almost a century. He's very clear. These aren't just isolated mistakes or bad days at the office. No, he frames them as connected case studies that show, in his view, an ethical decline at the Times. So we'll start way back with the Holodomor and the reporting of Walter Duranty. Very controversial stuff. Then we jump right up to recent times, a photo from Gaza on the front page that caused a huge storm. And finally, we look inside the newsroom itself. Through the story of Bari Weiss and why she left so publicly, Ruchelski connects these dots, arguing they show a pattern. A kind of vulnerability, maybe. So that gives you a roadmap, right?
Yeah.
We'll go through these eras, these events, and see how he builds his case.
Okay, that definitely sets a weighty tone. It forces us to maybe question some things we took for granted about such a major news source. I mean, the New York Times, for so long, it's been seen as the symbol, right? Journalistic excellence, factual reporting, deep dives. But Ruchelski says, hold on, let's look closer at some key moments. And to really get his argument, we have to start where he starts with our first big example he uses, the one he says casts this long, dark shadow, the Holodomor. We're talking about the famine in Ukraine, 1932 to 1933. And this wasn't just a bad harvest or something natural, no. Ruchelski and pretty much all historians now agree this was deliberate. a man-made famine. A genocidal policy by Stalin to crush Ukrainian nationalism, to force collectivization, and the method, starvation, just brutal. Millions of Ukrainians starved to death. The scale is just horrifying. Estimates are, 3.5 to 7 million people, maybe more. The Soviets took the farms, seized all the grain, even the seeds for next year. They sealed the borders, trapped people inside to die. People were collapsing in the streets, kids orphaned, whole villages gone, just unimaginable suffering, a calculated famine.
And right in the middle of this horror, you have the reporting from the New York Times' man in Moscow, Walter Duranty.
Exactly. Walter Duranty is absolutely central to this first part of Reshevsky's critique. Duranty was the Times Moscow correspondent, the bureau chief, right through this period. So while millions are literally starving, what's Duranty reporting? Reshevsky digs up the quotes. Duranty actually wrote, and this is a direct quote, "There is no famine, nor is there likely to be. Just flat-out denial." Published in the New York Times. Reshevsky argues this wasn't just missing the story, it was actively denying a genocide that was happening right then. Duranty was painting this picture of Soviet success, He even had that infamous line, something like, "You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs," just an appalling way to dismiss mass death. And Reshevsky makes another really crucial point here. Duranty wasn't just sitting in Moscow getting bad info. He actively worked to shut down other journalists who were trying to report the truth. Reshevsky highlights Gareth Jones, a Welsh journalist. Jones actually went into Ukraine, walked through the countryside. He saw the starvation firsthand, talked to people, risked everything, Reshevsky says, to report what he saw with his own eyes. Jones publishes accounts in British papers directly contradicting Duranty. So what did Duranty do? Did he investigate? No. Reshevsky shows how Duranty, using his platform at the Times, basically trashed Jones's reports, called him a liar, implied he was exaggerating. He even worked with Soviet officials to discredit Jones publicly. So it's not just failing to report the truth, Reshevsky stresses, it's actively suppressing it. That's a huge ethical breach in his view. And then comes the part that's maybe the hardest to swallow. In 1932, Walter Duranty won the Pulitzer Prize for his reporting on the Soviet Union, the highest honor in journalism, for coverage that, Reshevsky and historical evidence say was fundamentally false. Propaganda, really. And here's the kicker. The Pulitzer has never been revoked. Never. Even though the Holodomor is now widely recognized as genocide, even by the U.S. Congress, even after the New York Times itself, decades later in 2003, basically admitted Duranty's reporting was flagrant propaganda. Still has the prize. So Reshevsky asks, what does that say about accountability? For the paper, for the Pulitzer board, how do you square that? It's a really uncomfortable question, isn't it? Reshevsky sees it as this permanent stain. And Reshevsky connects this to the bigger picture, the geopolitics of the time. It's pretty chilling. While Ukrainians starved, the grain stolen from them was being sold to the West, including the U.S., not for aid, no, for cash. Hard currency the Soviets needed. And what did they use that cash for? To buy Western technology, industrial machines, to fund Stalin's big industrialization push. So Reshevsky paints this picture where Western countries maybe eager for trade or focused on other things, basically. Well, his words are they looked the other way in the face of genocide, a kind of complicity maybe, or willful ignorance. He brings up the movie Mr. Jones from 2019, directed by Agnieszka Holland. He says it dramatizes this really powerfully, shows Duranty living it up in Moscow while Jones finds horror in Ukraine. And it really highlights what Reshevsky sees as the press or parts of it being complicit with these regimes, a failure of responsibility.
Wow. So, okay, let's absorb that for a second. A major newspaper denying a genocide, discrediting those telling the truth. Its reporter gets the top prize for it. The prize still stands. What does that do to our idea of journalistic credibility? Reshevsky, it clearly thinks it leaves a massive scar, not just on the Times, but maybe on the whole idea of the press as a truth teller. He suggests it sets a precedent, right? That maybe sometimes other things, politics, economics, ideology, can trump basic journalistic ethics. So for you, listening now, does knowing this history change how you read the news today? Does it make you wonder what pressures might be subtly shaping stories now? Reshevsky thinks this story is crucial context for what comes next. Okay, so if the Holodomor, in Reshevsky's framework, was about denying a real famine, then the next case he brings up, much more recently, is almost the exact opposite. It's like an inversion. He argues the paper effectively manufactured a famine that wasn't actually there. Let's unpack this one. We jump to July 25, 2025, according to Reshevsky's article, so very current. The New York Times runs this front page photo, a really shocking image.
A severely underweight Palestinian child. And the headline, or at least the strong implication, was that Israel was using famine as a weapon in Gaza. The child was named 18-month-old Mohammed Zakaria al-Matuk. Looked terribly emaciated. You can imagine the impact. Front page of the Times. That kind of image hits you right in the gut. Shapes how you see the conflict instantly.
Right. And this is where Rachevsky really digs in, because almost immediately, the story behind that photo started to look very different. Not because of the Times' own follow-up initially, but from independent journalists and researchers like David Collier. They started looking into Mohammed al-Matuk's specific situation. And what they found, which Rachevsky details carefully, was that the initial reporting lacked crucial, absolutely essential context. The tragic reality was that this little boy's condition, his severe underweight state, it wasn't because of the war. It wasn't starvation from lack of food in Gaza. No, he had multiple chronic conditions, really serious health problems from birth, a rare genetic disorder, cerebral palsy, hypoxemia, which means low oxygen, other complications. He needed specialized medical care. It was a long-standing medical issue. And Rachevsky points out the boy's own mother confirmed this to these independent journalists. She said he was getting physical therapy for his cerebral palsy, and importantly, that he was getting enough nutrition. Rachevsky also notes something visible in the photo the Times used. Mohammed's sibling in the background looked healthy, which, if there was widespread famine hitting that family, you wouldn't necessarily expect to see. So Rachevsky's core criticism is blunt. The Times ran this incredibly powerful front-page story implying famine. Quote, without any of this context, without doing the due diligence, he argues, to find out the real medical story behind the image. Now, look, reporting in conflict zones is incredibly hard. Verifying details is tough, no question. But Rachevsky's point is, for that kind of image front page, implying that kind of accusation using famine as a weapon, the bar for checking has to be exceptionally high. And then there's the paper's response, which Rachevsky argues just reinforces his point about ethical problems. After these other facts came out, after the public criticism started mounting, 4 days later, July 29th, 2025, the Times issued what Rachevsky calls a short editorial note. Yes. It did acknowledge the boy's pre-existing conditions. It clarified some of the medical background. But, and this is key for Rachevsky, it was done without apology, without front-page prominence. So that the correction that completely changed the story's meaning, it was buried somewhere inside. Not given the same weight as the original, highly emotional, and, Rachevsky contends, misleading report. For him, that signals a real reluctance to own the mistake, to correct the record fully and visibly. It suggests they weren't willing to emphasize the correction the way they emphasized the initial flawed narrative.
And the public reaction, as you said, it wasn't quiet. It was immediate, and it was fierce. People were angry. Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli PM, went public, called it a modern blood libel. I mean, that's incredibly strong language, invoking historical anti-Semitism. He flat out accused the paper of using a false emotional narrative to manipulate opinion against Israel. That shows you how serious the charge of misrepresentation felt to some people. And it wasn't just talk. Rachevsky mentions actual protests. Protesters defaced the paper's Manhattan headquarters with graffiti reading, "NYT lies, Gaza dies." Very direct, very angry. Captures that feeling of betrayal, I think, that the paper had deliberately misled people on something so sensitive. And this is where Rachevsky connects it back to Duranty. It's a really striking comparison he makes. He says, this case inverted the logic of 1933. Instead of denying a real famine, the paper created famine that didn't exist. Wow. That parallel suggests for him it's not just about getting facts wrong, but maybe a deeper issue with how the paper handles truth when it intersects with conflict and ideology.
It definitely raises that important question, doesn't it, about public trust. When you see reporting like this, especially in incredibly charged situations like Gaza, Rachevsky argues it really erodes that trust. The danger, he suggests, is that these powerful emotional narratives can just swamp the factual reporting. And visuals, like that photo, are incredibly potent. They hit you emotionally before you even process the details. But this case, as Rachevsky lays it out, shows how easily visuals can mislead if the context isn't there, if the verification isn't done rigorously. That image seemed to scream famine caused by war. But the reality, uncovered later, was complex medical tragedy, unrelated. So Rachevsky's takeaway is about responsibility. It's not just about showing, it's about explaining, contextualizing, making absolutely sure the powerful story you're telling with an image is actually the true story. He feels the lack of immediate context and the sort of quiet correction later undermine the credibility the Times needs, especially on these huge, sensitive topics. Because that first impression, that gut reaction to the photo, that often sticks long after the correction nobody saw.
That's such a critical point, the sticking power of the first narrative, especially a visual one. Okay, so we've looked at reporting on the Holodomor, reporting on Gaza, both focused on the external output, what the Times published. But Rachevsky's third example shifts gears. It looks inside the paper. He argues the problem isn't just external reporting, it's also about the internal culture, the editorial environment. And his case study for this is Bari Weiss. Her story, he says, shows an internal erosion of intellectual freedom within the New York Times newsroom. Like the institution is policing itself in a way that limits debate.
Yeah, Bari Weiss's story is really central to Rachesky's argument about the internal dynamics. She was hired in 2017 for the opinion section, and the timing is important. It was right after Trump's election. There was this feeling, even inside the Times, that maybe they'd missed something, that they weren't reflecting the whole country. So the idea behind hiring Weiss, who had more center-right views and was big on free speech, was specifically to broaden ideological diversity. Bring in different voices, stir the pot a bit, have more debate on the opinion pages. That was her mandate. But according to Rachesky's account and Weiss's own words, she faced immediate pushback, resistance from within. Her efforts to actually bring in those diverse forces met with hostility inside the newsroom. And this all came to a head with her resignation in July 2020. She published this blistering resignation letter. In it, she described the newsroom as hostile, talked about veiled censorship, systematic intimidation, specifically for not conforming to what she called progressive orthodoxy. Essentially, she argued that if your views didn't align with a certain dominant perspective, you were targeted, making it impossible to do her job of fostering open debate. Rachesky sees this as a clash traditional open debate versus maybe a newer focus on social justice that sees some views as harmful.
And that description, especially what she said in the resignation letter, it suggests this had a real impact on actual editorial decisions. She had that really famous line, "Twitter has become the ultimate editor of the New York Times." Just think about that. What gets published, how it's framed, not decided by journalistic standards or editor's judgment, but by, as Weiss and Rachesky argue, fear of internal backlash, fear of the Twitter mob, or maybe colleagues piling on online. Rachesky suggests this creates an environment where people just self-censor. They avoid controversial topics. They don't pitch stories or opinions that might rock the boat because they're afraid of the internal reaction. Rachesky points to a key example, the Tom Cotton op-ed controversy. Senator Cotton wrote a piece arguing for using the National Guard during the George Floyd protests in June 2020. Violent protests specifically. Publishing that piece caused an absolute meltdown internally. Huge staff backlash. Public letters saying it endangered black staff. The pressure was intense. And the result? James Bennett, the opinion editor who approved it, was forced out. He lost his job over it. For Weiss, and Rachesky echoes this, that was the moment. It showed that certain dissenting views were no longer tolerated. It wasn't just about disagreeing. It was about the institution seemingly being unable to even host that kind of debate without punishing the person who allowed it. That, Rachesky argues, narrows the scope of acceptable thought dramatically.
And connecting that to the bigger picture, Rachesky argues this internal dynamic, this purge, as he sometimes implies, has serious consequences. If you stifle diverse thinking inside the newsroom, if open debate isn't safe, how does that not affect the final product, the news itself? If only certain viewpoints are welcome, the reporting can become one-sided. You lose nuance, you lose perspectives. Rachesky argues it leads to this narrow range of acceptable viewpoints, which undermines the whole idea of a comprehensive news source. It becomes an echo chamber. And Weiss's reaction is part of the story, too. Her resignation wasn't just an ending. Rachesky sees it as a beginning. She went on to found the Free Press, an independent media company. Rachesky holds it up as a contrast, calling it a place now known for honest reporting and civil debate. The implication is clear. She had to leave the legacy institution to create a space where she felt those values, open inquiry, viewpoint diversity, could actually thrive. The Free Press has definitely made waves publishing stuff that challenges mainstream takes. So for Rachesky, Weiss leaving and starting her own thing is powerful evidence of that erosion of freedom he sees within the older institutions. Like, the only way to have real debate is to go outside.
So, thinking about all that, what does it mean for intellectual freedom in the media? And for you listening? If internal pressures, if self-censorship, if this kind of ideological conformity Rachesky describes is happening, how does that affect the news you get? Are you potentially getting a skewed picture? It really pushes you to think, doesn't it? Is the news source you rely on truly a marketplace of ideas where tough questions get asked from all sides? Or is it becoming, maybe unintentionally, maybe not, more of an echo chamber for one set of views? It makes you question how you evaluate trustworthiness. Okay, so we've walked through these three moments. Decades apart, different situations. Holodomor denial, Gaza photo controversy, Bari Weiss's exit. But Rachesky insists they're not separate issues. He ties them all together. This is where his core argument comes into sharp focus. He sums it up so starkly. Duranty erased a real famine. The modern Times fabricated a famine that didn't exist. And today's editors expel internal dissenters. He presents it as this progression, almost. Different symptoms maybe, but the same underlying disease. A problem with truth-telling when ideology gets involved.
Exactly. He is absolutely emphatic. These are not isolated incidents, that's his phrase. He sees them as symptoms, expressions of broader editorial decay. And the result of this decay, he argues, is that truth gets sacrificed on the altar of ideology. That's the heart of his diagnosis. It's not just errors. It's a systemic shift away from prioritizing objective truth towards, in his view, aligning with certain agendas and letting those agendas shape the reporting. And he makes this fundamental point. It's really the cornerstone of his whole critique. Journalism should not serve causes, but facts. Quote, when the press aligns itself with deception, it becomes propaganda. That's a huge statement. He's saying the moment a news outlet puts advancing a cause, any cause, ahead of rigorously reporting the facts, it crosses a line. It stops being journalism, in his view, and starts being something else. Something that shapes opinion to fit an agenda, not to inform the public with unvarnished truth. That, for Reshevsky, is the ultimate betrayal of journalistic duty, and the biggest danger he sees. Now, obviously, this is Reshevsky's perspective. It's a strong critique. The New York Times would undoubtedly have different explanations for these events. But his argument forces us to really think about that line between reporting facts and promoting a viewpoint.
So, after digging into all this, what does it all mean for you? For us, as people trying to stay informed, Reshevsky's analysis, it's provocative, it's direct. It really pushes us to ask tough questions about the news we consume. It's not just about being critical in some vague way. It's about maybe looking at that front page story or that viral photo or that opinion piece and asking, what's the full context? Whose perspective is being centered? Whose might be missing? What agenda, if any, might be at play here? It suggests that being truly well-informed today takes work. It takes seeking out different sources, questioning narratives, and being aware of these potential pitfalls Reshevsky describes. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Roberto Reshevsky's Truth as the Enemy, we've tried to lay out his argument. This ongoing tension he sees between the ideals of journalism, objective truth, and the pressures, internal and external, of ideology. His work paints a picture, a critical one, of how even a giant like the New York Times might face challenges to its core mission.
And that leaves us with a really big question, I think, a crucial one for right now. In this age of information overload, constant news, spin everywhere, if even the big, established institutions we've relied on are seen, at least by critics like Reshevsky, as struggling with ideological pressures, then how do you tell the difference between solid, factual reporting and stuff that's pushing an agenda? What are your personal strategies? How do you make sure you're getting the real story built on facts, not just narratives someone wants you to believe? That's the challenge, isn't it? For all of us trying to navigate this world and actually understand it.
That's a wrap for this episode of The Deep Dive, exploring radical ideas, grounded in reality, driven by reason, built on self-esteem, rational self-interest, and laissez-faire capitalism, produced by Bob Rash.